I was going to do my Gdunka mod video today. I'm going to save that one because I just think this is a more important video. We're talking about this Kaita build that I made, and I quite love it. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And of course, you can get notifications, I guess, from YouTube if you click the bell thing. I've never even told anybody to do that in a video before, I don't think. Be sure to subscribe. It helps out the channel. And let me know your thoughts on this build in the comments, or what you think is your favorite of the Rahkshi Kaita, specifically from fans. Lego obviously has a lot of their own, including the Kabaya builds and of course the official builds. I think this honestly puts the official ones to shame, though I could definitely see some people arguing for the Kabaya. They look really cool in and of themselves. But I'd love to know your thoughts on mocks created by the community for the Rahkshi, because there have been some lovely ones out there. Speaking of lovely ones, I'm throwing my hat in the ring with this build right here, which I am kind of cheating because I'm using 3 of the same color Rahkshi. But if you wanted to see a version of it where you have normal, Kaita colors, this is what that looks like. And the build is available on Studio currently over on the Discord, link in the description for that. Instructions will be coming soon as well. I did want to make one little addendum though, in that I'm using the incorrect spines here. These are the spines for the white Rahkshi, but that is intentional in this build. I'll talk about why I chose those spines specifically here in a moment. So this build, it is a lovely build, in my personal opinion. I think it goes a long way towards feeling very filled out, like nothing's really wasted, not a lot of wasted space. And in terms of its overall size compared to a Toa Nuva, it's pretty respectable. It is similar in size overall to a Rahkshi. It's not a lot taller, but it is bigger. It's just more massive, right? And in spite of it being that size, it is able to hold itself up tremendously well. Like, these ankles have a good amount of friction on them. I'm trying to keep it balanced on my hand and in frame, which is difficult, but like, it doesn't feel like it's going to fall over. Now, obviously, center of gravity falls out of line, it's going to fall, but that happens to all models, right? And that is in part thanks to the design of these legs. They're very stable. They almost feel like the Maxillos equivalent to leg design. If you're familiar with Maxillos set, it's a highly posable set, though it is flawed because of the hips specifically. In this case here, though, these legs have an incredible amount of articulation, especially backwards. It's a little bit limited on forward articulation, in part because of just the orientation of those sockets, but there's really no way around that with the parts given. However, if you were to modify this slightly to change up, literally adding just 2 parts, you can change the orientation of those sockets, and you actually get a much greater range of forward movement on those legs. Is it necessary? I don't really think so. Overall, the build itself has a dynamic amount of range between the legs, so like, it's gonna work out just fine. However, again, that backwards mobility, that backwards articulation is quite insane. It's very easy for this character to just kneel down on one knee if you want to, as was shown in this pose right here, though it's hard to see the leg that's being knelt on, right? And it's also worth noting too that because there's nothing bridging these 2 limbs here, there's also an insane amount of overall like splay ability with the set itself. And of course, you can pair these 2 sets of articulation to give some really funky dynamics and movements and poses with this character in and of itself. In terms of the arm articulation, it's pretty self-explanatory, I like to think. It's got the little like foot shield piece over the arm, which just ends up looking like it fills this character out a little bit better. And of course, the body itself is really quite nice, in my opinion. It feels like nothing here is really tacked on to the character overall. A bit of a gap here in the body itself, but not too bad. And of course, those arms are going to be down most of the time. There's still plenty of leftover parts, though it does use every single brown part or colored part in the set, so all 30 sockets are used in here, but I think they're used to good effect. In fact, we have 1 socket hiding here which helps to lock these limbs in place so that when the limbs go in, they're locked, they're not going anywhere. And that's really lovely because it's difficult to do that with parts from a combination model, frankly. Moving on to the back side here, we have these limbs helping to shape up the back as well as the other Rahkshi foot as well, which ends up just making this feel very finished. But these limbs serve another purpose because the socket that's there specifically actually helps to lock this spine in place. So let's talk about that spine, shall we? When we look at the spine itself, it's actually connected into the open socket. I'll talk about that connection here in a moment, but it is why I chose the Korok spines. Again, we'll talk about that here in a minute. However, because it's on a frictionless pin, you would think it would slide around a lot, right? It can't actually go outward anymore because that socket ends up in the way. So it prevents it from moving outward, locking it in place there. But it can't move backward either because the shape of the lift arm it's connected to, the body of the Rahkshi, also prevents it from going in that direction, which means that they're locked in this exact orientation. Now you can rotate those spines if you want to. If you like them more flat or you like them more vertical, that's absolutely up to you. I like to do it a little bit at like a 45-degree angle, but overall the build for this is just very, very lovely in my opinion. So why choose the Korok spines there? Well, here's where we get into the illegal connection on this build. There is one thing that I did discover, I guess, while building this. Actually, there's two, and it is specifically that the excess plastic on the front of the Rahkshi spines is able to fit inside of an axle hole, actually quite well, but it can also fit inside of pinholes. It's a little bit more of a dubious connection because it's definitely putting a little bit of stress on the spines. Is it going to damage the spines? Probably nothing outside of a visible set of marks you might see, but I do think it's overall worth it because that connection is really solid. I mean, you could make a bow for a character from this if you wanted to, and because it still allows you to actually move the piece around. It's a pinhole, right? So it is essentially a friction pin connection, and it works out exceptionally well. But of course, like I said, if you've got this in like mint condition and you don't want to leave marks on it, maybe it's worth opting against this. I don't really mind it. I've got like 30 of these. That's not even a joke. I have a 12 cubic foot box here just full of Rahkshi parts, but it is worth noting that the white Rahkshi specifically has the most material left over in the front to work with. The green Rahkshi, in comparison, has like next to no plastic in the front, so it's very hard to connect that to anything stably. It will connect, but any sort of like movement on it is going to cause it to detach immediately. And the same is true for most of the other Rahkshi spines as well. The brown one is kind of special though, because the spines are alternating each other. It actually goes in, but it slightly goes in at an angle, or it tends to favor being at an angle, which is kind of problematic when you're trying to do something like this. So while you definitely can do it with this set, I just tend to avoid it. It looks like it'd be too easy to knock out of place, or maybe that's just me and that's my comfort. But it is absolutely possible to build this with the brown spines if you want to. However, if you don't want to use the spines like that at all, because you don't want to damage them at all, I did discover another hidden connection with Rahkshi pieces alone for the spines. It involves the foot piece. There's a small gap directly below this axle here, and the spines can actually fit inside of that gap quite nicely. It is a pretty secure connection overall, and of course you could flip it either way you want to, so it could be the front end or the back end. And so in that case, say you want to do something different than the weapons most people go for the Rahkshi, which is usually some combination of these pieces here, right? But I could take that Rahkshi foot off, I could take the staff out of its hand, and then I could just connect this to the hand instead, and now I've got these like blades on the arms itself, which is kind of cool, admittedly. So it's definitely an option that you have, but it's not the only option. Obviously, I favor this because I just think it looks better overall. And lastly, before we end the video, of course, these heads can actually be moved up as well, giving you a little bit of extra artificial height. But the center head, of course, is just connected to a regular Rahkshi spine, Krata inside there as well. So overall, I tend to like this aesthetic. It gives it more of like a rounded aesthetic up the top. Again, this build primarily focuses quite heavily, in fact, on like sort of dynamic shaping, right? So these limbs being angled outward, these back pieces being angled outward, and yet they're incredibly stable because it's just basically built around two long axles running through the body itself. So you're not going to have any issues with like the center of the model being weird to pose because it's just held up with ball joints and nothing else. Overall, it is a model that I'm a really big fan of, and I'm kind of surprised it didn't take terribly long to design. I think the whole process was maybe like an hour and 10 minutes or so for the initial design to come together, and then it was just tinkering with that a little bit to kind of the angles and stuff in here. On the back side too, these legs also sort of fit around the Rahkshi foot here as well. So once again, they sort of lock in place, so they're not left free floating, but they have a secure space dedicated sort of specifically for them, if that makes sense, right? And I think that goes a long way towards making the model feel very finished without it just having parts kind of flopping around all over. It's one of my problems with some of the Kabaya Rahkshi specifically is that like they look really cool, but they can be really fragile or flimsy, or just their body is built in a way where the articulation, it kind of suffers to its own articulation. Kind of the problem with Maxelos as well. Very articulate model, but unfortunately it suffers because of the sheer amount of weight and just the hips giving out overall. So yeah, that is the model in and of itself. Uses all of the tan friction pins, all of the brown pieces, or whatever color you choose here as well. If you wanted to add Krata inside here, you just remove these pins, but I personally think the pins are better because of course it helps secure the feet. I haven't had any issues with those popping open, but of course again, if you take those pieces out, you're probably gonna have more issues with it. So yeah, that is the build, that is the video. Once again, be sure to subscribe. It does help out the channel tremendously. Keep an eye on the description because that will probably change when the instructions for this come out as well. And you can also check this out right now over on the Discord, link for that in the description. The studio file for this is available. Anyway, that's it. I will see you all in the next one. Take care.